Howdy, my name is Kervin, I'm with 4Y Games, and this is the 4 most common pieces of advice that you get about board game self-publishing and why I chose not to do them. Number 1, join board game forums. It makes sense why people would want to join board game forums. You talk to board game designers and self-publishers and kind of get to figure out more about the industry. I, however, didn't find board game forums as helpful. Most board game forums were talking about sales sheets or they're talking about mid to heavy euros. They were also talking about super specific topics about an aspect of their game that's almost completed. And if you're just starting out, it was kind of overwhelming. So instead of joining board game forums, I decided to just consume a lot of media. I watched a lot of YouTube videos, listened to a lot of podcasts, and read every blog on the Stonemaier Games blog. Number 2, have your game be made in China. The board game industry is notorious for low margins, and I didn't realize how low they were until I started doing my own research. In order to make up for the low margins, instead of having them made domestically, they have them made internationally, and most board games are made in China. When I first started to look into manufacturing for my board game, I didn't want to do China. The biggest reason being it was during the big supply chain issues. I had friends whose games were stuck in the Suez Canal, and I had friends whose games were delayed for months, not knowing when they would ship because the cost of shipping was so high. I started to look at American printers and manufacturers and making components for my game myself. I had no idea how much cheaper it was to have games be made in China. If 2020 taught us anything, it was that we don't really make anything here. So it was really important for me, along with other reasons, to see if I could make my game in America to do it. So I did. Number 3, do a Kickstarter. There are tons of videos on the importance of a pre-launch and why Kickstarter is important. Kickstarter is an amazing tool that can help propel an independent game. What they don't tell you about Kickstarter is how much work it is to prep to do a Kickstarter, especially if you're not a graphic designer. There are many people in the board game industry who think doing a Kickstarter is the gold standard for how you should fund your game. Because if you can't fund a Kickstarter, your game isn't going to be successful. Those are also the same people who think the most money they'll ever make from their game is from a Kickstarter. They don't really talk about what happens after Kickstarter is done, and to me, that's the hard part. I decided to fund the game myself, and the biggest reason is I wanted to get to that part sooner. I wanted to be able to try a bunch of different marketing techniques, and honestly, I just wanted to see if I could do it. And number 4, go to board game conventions to sell your games. It makes sense, right? Like, every single person who goes to a board game convention could possibly want your game, so it's worth the money to have a vendor space at a convention. But what they don't talk about is that when you do your first vendor booth, all the costs it takes to do vendor booths. From the banners to the equipment to carry stuff into the booth, and just making your booth presentable costs more money than you think it does. And if you only do one convention a year, I don't know if it was worth it. So instead of doing board game conventions, I decided to join TikTok. The hardest part about starting your own game company is getting your name out there, and that's what I wanted to do with TikTok. I'm a content creator on TikTok, and I've been doing it for the last year. All the games I've sold so far have been exclusively from TikTok. I want to go to board game conventions to play games, not sell games. I made a cosplay expansion of my game, and I hope to one day have a panel and maybe even a vendor booth at a cosplay convention. I'm exponentially more likely to want to do a vendor booth if it's not exclusively a board game convention, and if it's just nerdy people in general.